Differences over Taiwan's status have exacerbated escalating tensions between the island and the mainland, and Taiwan has the potential to be a flashpoint in U.S.-China tensions. Starting on January the 8th, the Chinese military conducted large-scale combined combat strike maneuvers, sending warplanes and Navy vessels toward Taiwan, according to both the Chinese and the Taiwanese defense ministries. So, is China getting ready for war with Taiwan and potentially the U.S.? Or is it just a military drill? Tensions have always been high between China and Taiwan. The recent exercises coincided with the Taiwan visit of a delegation of German lawmakers on January 9th. The delegation is led by Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, the German Parliament's Defense Committee chairperson. The German legislatures met with Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen, as well as the head of Taiwan's National Security Council and the Mainland Affairs Council, which deals with China-related problems. In recent years, China has increased its pressure on Taiwan's military by dispatching airplanes or Navy vessels almost daily to the self-ruled island. China claims control over the island, which separated from the mainland during a civil war in 1949. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, the exercises that began on Sunday have continued into Monday, with its missile systems watching Chinese jets and Navy vessels. The acts of China have severely disrupted the peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits and the surrounding waters. Between 6 a.m. Sunday and 6 a.m. Monday, China's People's Liberation Army flew 57 airplanes and 4 ships toward Taiwan. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense said in a statement Monday, 28 of those planes flew beyond the Taiwan Straits median line, an unofficial limit that both sides have traditionally respected. The drills were announced at 11 p.m. Sunday, with the primary goal being to practice land strikes and sea assaults, according to Shi Yi, a spokesperson for the PLA's Eastern Theater Command. China sent a record 71 planes and 7 ships to Taiwan at the end of December, the largest such drill in 2022. Military specialists assembled by the Center for Strategic and International Studies prepared and ran a war game for the Chinese amphibious invasion of Taiwan 24 times at the start of the new year. The result shows that the victory over Taiwan might leave the U.S. military as weakened as the Chinese forces it repelled. At the end of the fight, at least 2 U.S. aircraft carriers would be sunk in the Pacific, and China's modern fleet, the world's largest, would be in shambles. Chinese President Xi Jinping has refused to rule out the use of military force to seize control of the island. There is no unclassified war game out there looking at the U.S.-China conflict, said Mark Kansian, one of 3 project leaders and a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Of the games that are unclassified, they're usually only done once or twice. CSIS played this war scenario 24 times in order to answer 2 essential questions. Would the invasion succeed, and if so, at what cost? According to the CSIS analysis, the likely answers to these 2 queries are no and tremendous. The United States and Japan lost dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of service members. Such losses would damage the U.S. global position for many years, the report said. In most scenarios, the U.S. Navy lost 2 aircraft carriers and 10 to 20 big surface combatants. In 3 weeks of conflict, over 3,200 U.S. troops would be killed, nearly half of what the U.S. lost in 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. China also suffers heavily. Its navy is in shambles, the core of its amphibious forces is broken, and tens of thousands of soldiers are prisoners of war, it said. According to the research, China would lose 10,000 troops as well as 155 combat planes and 138 significant ships. Even if a Chinese invasion fails, the possibilities suggest a dismal future for Taiwan. While Taiwan's military is unbroken, it is severely degraded and left to defend a damaged economy on an island without electricity and basic services, the report said. According to the study, the island's army would suffer approximately 3,500 losses, and all 26 destroyers and frigates in its navy would be sunk. According to the research, Japan is expected to lose more than 100 combat aircraft and 26 warships if China attacks U.S. military stations on its home soil. However, CSIS stated that it did not intend its study to indicate that a battle over Taiwan was inevitable or even probable. The Chinese leadership might adopt a strategy of diplomatic isolation, gray zone pressure, or economic coercion against Taiwan, it said. According to Dan Grazier, a senior military policy fellow at the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO, an outright Chinese invasion of Taiwan is exceedingly implausible. According to Grazier, such a military action would immediately disrupt the imports and exports on which the Chinese economy depends for survival, and disrupting this trade risks the Chinese economy collapsing in quick order. According to Grazier, China relies on food and fuel imports to power its economic engine and has little leeway. Since then, Beijing has increased its military pressure on the island, sending fighter jets across the Taiwan Strait, the body of water between Taiwan and China, and into the island's air defense identification zone, a buffer of airspace known as an ADIZ. Speaking about Taiwan at the 20th Chinese Communist Party Congress in October, Chinese leader Xi Jinping received a standing ovation when he said China would strive for peaceful reunification, but then he issued a dire warning saying, "We will never promise to renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all necessary measures." The Biden administration has maintained its assistance for the island in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, which states that Washington will equip the island with the means to defend itself without committing U.S. troops to that defense. The newly enacted National Defense Authorization Act commits the United States to a program to upgrade Taiwan's military and gives $10 billion in security aid over a 5-year period, demonstrating long-term bipartisan support for the island. Despite the Pentagon's insistence that Washington's One China policy remains unchanged, Biden has stated several times that U.S. armed personnel would defend Taiwan if the Chinese military launched an invasion. The U.S. recognizes China's position that Taiwan is part of China under the One China policy, but has never officially accepted Beijing's claim to the self-governing island. Wars happen even when the objective analysis might indicate that the attacker might not be successful, said Cancian. According to the CSIS analysis, 4 constants emerged among the 24 wargame iterations run to prevent China from eventually seizing control of Taiwan. Taiwan's ground forces must be capable of containing Chinese beachheads. The U.S. must be able to use its bases in Japan for combat operations. The U.S. must have long-range anti-ship missiles capable of hitting the PLA Navy from afar and en masse, and the U.S. must fully arm Taiwan before engaging in any conflict with its own forces. There is no Ukraine model for Taiwan, the paper stated, referring to how U.S. and Western aid gradually trickled into Ukraine long after Russia's invasion of its neighbor began, and how no U.S. or NATO forces are actively fighting Russia. Once the war begins, it's impossible to get any troops or supplies into Taiwan, so it's a very different situation from Ukraine, where the United States and its allies have been able to send supplies continuously to Ukraine, said Cancian. Whatever the Taiwanese are going to fight the war with, they have to have that when the war begins. According to the think tank, Washington will need to act quickly to achieve some of the CSIS criteria for success in a Taiwan confrontation. Fortifying U.S. bases in Japan and Guam against Chinese missile attacks, shifting its naval forces to smaller and more survivable ships, prioritizing submarines, prioritizing sustainable bomber forces over fighter forces, but producing more cheaper fighters, and pushing Taiwan toward a similar strategy, arming itself with similar weapons platforms rather than expensive ships that are unlikely to survive a Chinese first strike. According to the CSIS assessment, these principles would make winning less expensive for the U.S. military, but the toll would still be considerable. The United States might win a Pyrrhic victory, suffering more in the long run than the defeated Chinese. Victory is not everything, the report said. The Chinese are going to do everything they can, in my estimation, to avoid a military conflict with anybody, Grazier said. They'll use industrial and economic power instead of military force to challenge the United States for global dominance. But Pentagon leaders have labeled China as America's pacing threat, and last year China's military power report mandated by Congress said, the PLA increased provocative and destabilizing actions in and around the Taiwan Strait, to include increased flights into Taiwan's claimed air defense identification zone and conducting exercises focused on the potential seizure of one of Taiwan's outlying islands. The visit of then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the island in August triggered a wide-ranging display of PLA military strength, including the launch of missiles over the island and into Japan's exclusive economic zone.